Hey Sequoids, today we're going to talk about analyzing the two sides of the Civil War and understanding what were the major differences between the North and the South. In regards to population, the North had 22 million people across 23 states. In the South, 9.5 million people in 11 states. Of those 9.5 million, 3.5 million were slaves in those southern states. When it comes to education and skills, in the North, public school accounted for better educated citizens, along with more skilled labor, management positions, and not as much agricultural or farming. In the South, less than half of the general population could read or write, and most citizens and children were involved in agriculture and farming. Philosophy. Now, when it comes to this war, the backstory, what it really comes down to is the North is fighting to save the Union. This is an important point. They're not fighting to end slavery, it's fighting to restore and save the Union. For the South, they felt with Abraham Lincoln being elected in 1860 as president, it was a moral cause that they're fighting to save their way of life. Southerners kind of saw this as their type of revolutionary war, and that it was their right to make sure they were self-determined, have that self-government, and the guaranteed of their fundamental freedoms. When it comes to the economics, in the North, 92% of the business was considered manufacturing, with 8% being agriculture. In the South, it's the exact opposite, with 10% being manufacturing, mostly located in Richmond, Virginia, with the other 90% being agricultural, with cotton being the big push, followed by rice, tobacco, and sugar. Now, when it comes to capital and funds in the government, the North actually accounted for 75% of the nation's wealth, which was located there in the reserves and the banks. And in the South, 25% of the wealth was located there. And by splitting away from the Union, they created Confederacy dollars to replace Union money. And because of this, there was a great deal of inflation. The cost of goods went up because Confederacy dollars really didn't have much monetary value. Now, when it comes to political leadership, in the North, on the left you have Abraham Lincoln, and on the right you have the Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Now, when it comes to government, in the North, the government had been established, for over 80 years, and at this point had proven to be working. But in the South, there was very few and inexperienced leadership, and it needed to work on gaining that ability of being respectable. With the military, and especially in particular with the Navy, the North was far superior, and they were able to control the Atlantic Sea. In the South, they really didn't have a Navy at all, and the only purpose of their ships was trying to break through the North's blockades to try and get supplies to and from the South. Now, when it comes to arsenal and military weapons, a majority are located in the North, and the products to supply the military were manufactured in the North. Now, in the South, there were only 2 arsenals actually located. When it comes to leadership, this is where the South has a big advantage. The military leadership is not as strong in the North, and that's why there's so many military general turnover in the North. In the South, they had superior leadership, and they were more able to adopt and kind of use those strategies to fend off the North. Now, when it comes to enlistment, about 1.5 million in the North were enlisted, but they were drafted. And when it comes to the South, a little over 1 million, but they were mostly volunteers. A lot of these volunteers were joining because they wanted to fight to preserve their way of life. In regards to transportation, there's an intense network of railroads. 75% of the nation's railways are within the Union States, and there are various hubs that could be distributed to move military supplies and troops. In the South, only 25% of the railroad system was really located there, with only one main hub, which is being Atlanta. For the type of war, the North is fighting more of an offensive front, and a majority of the battles are going to be fought in the South. And the South now, they're trying to just play defense. They're trying to keep the North out and they're fighting on their own soil. When it comes to communications, because they're fighting in the South, it is more difficult for the North, okay? And in the South, it's a lot easier because they're able to go across shorter distances. This device right here was used for communication, known as a telegraph, where they would talk with Morse code to send messages back and forth to each other for the North and the South. In regards to foreign allies, they really didn't play much of a factor. For the North, there weren't any. And for the South, you could say England, but it was very limited in how England was actually trying to offer supplies or aid to the South. Now, overall objective, I kind of already stated this earlier, but the North had to win the war, and their goal is to restore the Union. In the South, it wasn't about necessarily winning the war, getting victory. It's about having a draw would have been acceptable, making sure that the Northerners of the Union stay on their side, and the South, the Confederates, are able to have their way of life and set up their own government in order to keep the institution of slavery. Thanks for tuning in to today's clip video. If you have any questions, just do a quick rewind or just hit me up in class. Take care. Have a great day. Bye.